Hello everyone, it's Ray-chan. I'm doing something a little different today, as you can tell by the title of the video. A friend of mine asked me if I could do a voiceover tutorial, and I thought that it was a good idea. Usually my speed paints are made to archive my methods, in case I want to reference how I did certain techniques in the future. Today I will be going over my general process. I am drawing a couple of my original characters from my webtoon concept, which I may or may not complete. I make no promises. This illustration is a bit different from what I normally do, and by that I mean that if you have seen my previous works, you will know that I generally have only one character as a focus, most of the times from the bust or shoulder up. Today I'm drawing two characters interacting with each other in a resting, calm embrace. Aside from figuring out how to draw all these limbs without making it look unnatural or awkward, this also means that I won't be focusing on the face as much, which is something that I usually do in my other illustrations. Regardless, the basic fundamentals should be the same, so let's begin. To start, I begin with the sketch layer, as many artists do. In my previous speed paints, you will notice that I rarely include the creation of a sketch layer in the footage. This is mainly because I could envision the composition better when the screen capture isn't on, as I feel free to scrap one idea for another until it looks interesting enough. Today, I suffer for educational purposes. But aside from composition, my sketch layer also includes a very rough anatomy and expression, which is something I might want to reference back toward when I end up rendering the picture later on in the process. I want to make note that when creating sketches, I never use the color black. The reason for this is the same reason as why I never use pen brushes. Black is a very opaque and powerful color. It's eye-catching and eye-trapping, causing me to lose focus on the picture as a whole and get lost in the details. It makes the sketch look too final, too set in stone. This might be just me, but I don't want to worry about fine-tuning details until it's time to render the image. This is also the same reason why I dropped doing line art altogether. It's definitely a skill I admire and wish I had, but it's not the direction my style developed. I use colors for my sketch. Any color, honestly, although I prefer using bright colors that represent the lighting of the illustration. This is another function of my sketch layer. I have very few layers to create my base character layer. My sketch and my flat colors are the two layers that comprise of my base character layer. When it comes to color composition, I have a general theme in my work. I tend to fill my gallery with dark pieces, and by dark, I mean the subject is typically in a dark room or atmosphere, or it is nighttime. I do this because I like my lighting to be moody. And when I say moody, I mean strongly tinted light, which is best expressed with dark background as a contrast. I've learned to not completely rely on layer modes, such as add glow or glow dodge, because sometimes it can give out a washed out effect. There are a lot of videos on color theory here on YouTube, so you can check them out. I personally watched Cynic's Design, Ishtibrak tutorials, but in short, the subject will be tinted by the color of the light source. For example, in an orange sunset, the subject may be wearing a blue shirt, but because of the saturated orange glow, the blue will appear a more orange color, creating maybe a gray, green, brown, or maybe even orange if the lighting source is strong enough. I'll use the clip function found in Clip Studio Paint to clip the sketch layer and use an airbrush tool to make the lighting blend from one area to another. If I think the gradient of the sketch looks pretty on its own, I consider that pretty complete. My next step is to create a new raster layer and roughly fill in the flat colors. I will pick colors directly from the reference. Sometimes I will use a multiply mode on my airbrush to give some direction of where the shadows will go. Other times I will pick small pixels of dark colors to brush in shadows. Again, I try to avoid black. There are times I will intentionally make the painting grayscale so the light source is the sole source of color. And I would really like to try that one day, but this isn't the illustration for that. Another way I could use colors in my sketch is to give a more saturated shadow. Rather than just adding black to make any color darker, I would mix in a color adjacent on the color wheel. If you have a cool red, for example, then consider adding a navy blue as a shadow instead of a dark burgundy. I'm not always mindful of where my lighting is coming from or what source they are from, but my sketch tends to give me a general idea. These characters are avatars of other characters in my story, so they reside in the digital domain. They have little bits of techno-futuristic elements in their design, so I'm adding in bright neon pink and computer screen blue. I then copy my flat layer and my sketch layer, make a duplicate, and merge the two together. This is the layer I will be doing all my rendering. I only use a few brushes. I use this paint and apply brush, which is a default brush in Clip Studio Paint, and I use it for both the blending and painting. If I need really opaque, hard detail, I will use dense watercolor, but I generally reserve that if I want to draw something with a fine point, such as hair wisp or eyelashes. I begin with the face. Again, smudging the sketch and flat color layer together to get a shade suitable for the middle shadow. I smooth out the face and define the jawline. When drawing faces, especially female faces, I like to imagine I'm putting makeup on them. There's layers and areas you want to make dark or pop with color. I will continue rendering the face until all the features are to my liking and hopefully in proportion. I don't generally draw masks that often, and depending on how loose it fits on the face, the facial features may not be defined. I was going back and forth on whether to draw the mouth via digital emoticons or realistically. If you look closely, you can see where the sketch was helpful. On the girl's face, there are some areas of green, and that's okay. That resulted from the blue color gradient blurring from the boy's hair. I decided to further implement it, as the boy's character design actually has glowing neon streaks in his hair, and that glowing streaks will end up bouncing onto the bottom of the girl's nose and underneath her lip. My method of shading hair keeps changing, but generally I use my paint and apply brush to create larger ribbons of hair, and the dense watercolor brush to give the illusion of detail. With the body of the girl's sweater, I wanted to mention that because it's such a gray-white, I wanted to add in blues and pinks. When rendering her footwear, there was this color gradient near the knee joint that I liked a lot. So I decided to go back into the sweater and recolor the shadows in that way. For me, drawing the colors is mostly experiment. I usually just try and pick out colors, see what works, generally try to fit them all into one cohesive palette. Once I fixed up the anatomy, I can move to all the fun effects. This is where the drawing comes together into a cohesive piece. This is the portion of the drawing where my layers add up in numbers, mainly because if I merge these effect layers, they diminish in strength or effect. I mentioned before that I don't use the majority of my brushes. That's true, but I meant that I don't use them for my main drawing. Most of my brushes are effect brushes used to detail my work with patterns. For this piece, I'm using the confetti brush, which is actually another preset that comes along in the Clip Studio paint software. There are 2 layer modes I use for lighting, Add Glow and Glow Dodge. Occasionally I will use Screen, but that is very rarely, and generally if I'm creating an environment piece. The biggest difference between Add Glow and Glow Dodge is that Add Glow ends up in a very whiter light, and what I mean by that is the color is more washed out. In the meanwhile, Glow Dodge has a more saturated, colorful light. This can also end up becoming choppy in its gradient if you use it too much, so this is why I put emphasis on adding in color through the sketch layer beforehand. For shadow, I use multiply and linear burn. Again, the difference between the two is how they interact with the other colors. I prefer linear burn in low opacity. It results in deeper, sharper contrast between shadow and parts that are lighter. Multiply has more of a screen effect. It's a little bit like laying a sheet of jello on your work. It's very helpful if you want the overall color to have a tint of that hue, especially when dealing with atmosphere. In this particular case, I use both because I do want the entire illustration to have a little bit of a blue vibe. After erasing where I don't want my shadows to be with the soft airbrush, using the color, quote-unquote, empty, I finalized the illustration by adding glowing details with Glow Dodge. The last thing I want to do is make sure my characters are interacting with their background. I add a few of the confetti light particles in front and blur some in the back to create depth. And this illustration is complete. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Please remember I'm not an expert and I'm still learning. As seen by my earlier speed paints, my style is subject to radically change sometimes, but I do hope this helped you with your own art journey, or at the very least that you had fun watching the video. Let me know if this tutorial helped, or if you want to see more tutorials in the comment section, or if you would prefer my regular speed paint. I'll see you all next time. In the meanwhile, take care and be safe everyone. This is JayJen thanking you for watching, and if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more.